I leaned back and stared at the 4 men sitting on the opposite side of the table. They were all tall and thin, with silver eyes and the crimson hair of royal witches. They all wore the same type of expensive-looking suit, though 3 were in grey and 1 in blue, and the same holier-than-thou expression that graced the faces of so many royal witches up here in Canberra when confronted by someone they considered below their station. In my case, far below. That they wanted to be anywhere but here was obvious, and something I could totally understand. I mean, I did have bigger problems in my life right now. A relationship with an ornery werewolf hanging in the balance, a court case against my father to testify at, and a re-evaluation of my magical powers to attend, the result of which could cause me major fucking problems with the High Witch Council. But here we were, staring at each other across the vast sea of polished wood, in a room that wasn't only soundproofed, but also warded against magic. The latter was definitely a good thing. I didn't want them attempting to spell me because that might lead to a reaction from my inner wild magic, and more questions than I wanted to answer right now. The only reason we were here in the first place was their refusal to accept Clayton Marlowe's will. To say they were seriously annoyed by the fact that I'd inherited a good portion of his estate would be the understatement of the year. It was also understandable, given said estate was worth tens of millions, and that was just the property portfolio. Of course, it was never meant to come to me. At all. My father, who'd magically forced me into the marriage with Clayton when I was below the legal age, had always intended the so-called bride price inheritance to be transferred to him. Then I'd gone and upset everything by not only running away on my wedding night, but basically disappearing for well over 10 years, sending Clayton into a destabilized mental state and ensuring my father never got his hands on the estate he'd always coveted. An estate he still coveted. Problem was, he'd done too good a job of tying down the will's legalities, and there was nothing he, or anyone in this room, could now do to stop me inheriting, not without challenging the will in court. "Miss Grace," Ryland said, in a tone that managed to be both condescending and pitying. He was the oldest of Clayton's 2 brothers, and the one that looked the least like him. "Surely you must understand that if this goes to court, you will lose. 100,000 is more than enough compensation." "In what century?" I cut in coldly. "I was on the fucking run for 10 years. It's hardly the fault of anyone in this room that wedding night jitters got the better of you," another man said. Francis, a cousin, if I remembered right. I met his gaze evenly. "You just added another $1 million to the end cost." "Don't be fucking—" "Francis, quiet," Ryland snapped, then gave me what I presumed was supposed to be a soothing smile, but instead looked predatory. But that was okay. After all the goddamn supernatural entities I'd fought over the last year, a human predator was something of a welcome relief. "We'll double the offer," he continued. "It is more than fair, given the marriage was recently annulled and there was no son produced, as stipulated." "Actually," my lawyer cut in smoothly, "the requirement of a son was not tied to Miss Grace's inheritance on Mr. Marlowe's death, but rather the bride price. It was a bonus to be paid to her father, Mr. Lawrence Marlowe, if a male child was produced. Because we daughters were not valued at all in the Marlowe world, or at least unpowered daughters like me weren't. Of course, my father's attitude had done something of a backflip recently, after discovering my ability to manipulate wild magic. Royal witches had been attempting to control it for eons, simply because the wild magic, and the wellsprings it formed, were a source of untapped but potentially unimaginable power. But it was a power that called as easily to darkness as to the light, and if left unprotected, could cause great harm to the people and areas around the wellsprings.